Now, if you're joining us right now, you are joining the all-important conversation on Insight Tonight. And tonight we have somebody who's no stranger to your screens. We have the great Mark Bichachi with us. He's an analyst par excellence. He's a communication strategist, and he wears many, many other hats. Karibu sana.
Asante sana. I should have you introduce me everywhere. It is very good for my ego.
Yeah, is that so? Fika Bay, Fika Bay. All right, all right. But karibu sana.
Thank you
Welcome
very
to
much.
the home of untold stories.
Yes.
Right away, talk to us. You're a communication strategist.
Yes.
Talk to us about how this trip has been communicated right from the beginning.
Well, you know, I'll talk about the communication on two sides. One on the sides of the United States, then on the side of Kenya.
Precisely.
The United States, in just simply inviting President Ruto to a state dinner, the first for an African president since 2008, and that was John Kufuor. And John Kufuor was major because he was basically redoing the Ghanaian economy. He was pulling up a Ghanaian renaissance, if you will. So it was a critical moment. And of course, this was a time when Obama was coming in and things like that. So it was an interesting time. For Biden to do so, one, during a campaign year,
right?
Okay. Two, and to give Kenya the status and the pomp he's given it, it is a big statement. It's the biggest compliment the United States can give an African country. Yes. Number two is, I think the Republic of Kenya underplayed the importance of this trip.
Walicheza chini. Why?
First, I think it is because they wanted it to have the impact it has had. Because today has been big. Right? I don't think there's a single person who can draw a point away from William Ruto today. Today, he has been president for everyone in the deepest part of Azimio to the most hustler of the hustler nation, simply because everything that he's been talking about has been talked about and delivered to the Kenyan people. If you just think about it, $1 billion in extra investments, extra infrastructure, extra help for the country of Kenya, plus being recognized as a strategic security partner.
That's huge.
That's huge. It's unheard of. This is the first country that I've heard of in Africa to get such recognition, and there are only 16 across the world.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Now, we're going to be delving deeper into the significance of that. Yeah. But also just in the run-up to this event, talk to us about the choice of delegation.
Yes.
You know, the Kenyan delegation there. A few criticisms on who was brought along, but also just on the whole, what is that group supposed to represent? You know, and did it succeed representing that?
To be honest with you, when I look at the delegation and I see Duale, he needs to be there. He's the CS for Defense. I see Mudavadi. He's not only Prime Secretary, but he's the CS of Foreign Affairs. You look at Kimani Ichung'wah. He is the leader of the majority in Parliament. He is the one who's going to execute this agenda. And I can go on and on. I have not seen any senior politician who's not supposed to be there. And contrary to other pictures, when you look at the picture of the meeting today, you see a very balanced team. You can see the opposites sitting each other. You don't see a bloated cabinet representation from Kenya. You don't see unnecessary people. You see even the security advisor, former CS,
Monica Juma.
An
experienced hand.
Yes. So in terms of the team that the president chose, I would be at pains to say that he chose someone who was not supposed to be there. Even the celebrities I'm seeing that went to the various studios, those are the people who do need to go there. It's unlike previous times where people who are not running for athletics were wearing athletic gigs. Yes. Yeah. But at the end of it all, even if you want to nitpick, what the president has achieved today is something that for him and his policy can only be equated to the time when Kibaki got funding back to Kenya. It can be equated to the time when the Chinese decided to pay for SGR and other projects. It is that big. Huge. It is historic. That significant. And just to put it into perspective, the amount of funding that the president has gotten today is equivalent to roughly 1% of our GDP.
That much.
Remember, our GDP is just about $110 billion. So $1 billion is 10%, is 1%.
Significant.
Yes, it's significant. So in terms of raw numbers, if you look at the jobs and whatever it is that you want to look at, President Ruto, his delivery has overshadowed anything else that you might want to nitpick about it.
Speaking of nitpicking,
Yes.
or perhaps just different opinions,
Yes.
earlier on today, some of your colleagues in the, have opined that, hey, the Americans are good at making promises. I'm
Yes.
literally quoting one good professor saying
Yes.
the Americans are good at making promises and very poor at keeping them. What would you say to that?
There's a difference between a promise that is discussed on phone. There's a difference between a promise that is being discussed at a departmental level where Foreign Affairs is talking about it, and there's a difference between a promise that is made at a state dinner and a president's seat. Those are not
For the eyes of the world.
Yes, those are not promises that are likely to be backtracked, unless you want to say that you're talking about the possibility of Trump pulling back on those particular deals. And I'll tell you he won't. And I'll tell you why. Biden has been tough on China. Trump started being tough on China. If this particular incursion by the United States into befriending Kenya is about replacing China as the best friend of Kenya, then I can assure you Trump will do more, right?
All right.
Number two, if it is about security, whether it is stabilizing the Sudan, Ethiopia, South Sudan, Somalia, dealing with conflicts between Rwanda and Congo and what have you, there is no other country better placed in East Africa than Kenya itself. So whether you look at it in terms of a Democrat perspective or a Republican perspective, it will be very difficult and unprofitable really for President Trump, if he comes back, to undo what Biden has done. And also remember, the statement of making Kenya a strategic security partner is not a statement that any president can easily undo. Remember, there are only 16 countries that have got... Yes, and Biden did not say, my administration is doing it. And this is something that perhaps Kenyans need to understand.
And do you think we can learn from that, just on that
Yes.
point, in the sense of things that outlast a political regime?
Exactly, because what Biden has done, he is not doing something that is Democrat. And this is something that people need to analyze and really understand. What Biden has done, and whichever way you look at it, number one, let's say he's doing it because of Haiti. Let's give it that. If he's doing it because of Haiti, how long do you think Haiti is going to be a problem? And is it going to change being a problem when Trump comes in, if Trump comes in? No, it will still be a problem. What do they need? They need a country that is not European, that is not white, that cares for the people, that has a history of doing peace missions, and they can be trusted to do so. Kenya has offered to do that. If Trump wants to change that, it will take him 2 years just to stitch a deal. So these are not deals, again, like, for example, Coca-Cola pledging to put in 25 billion shillings worth of investment in Kenya. This is not a political decision. It's not that they're sitting
money
there.
has to make sense.
Yeah, they're not sitting there with $200 million saying, what are we going to do? Let's give Kenya. No,
right.
These are not political decisions. Some of them... Let me give you another example. When you talk about the National Health Institute and its partnership with the CDC in the United States, these are things that are critical because, number one, what most people don't know is most research into human research, crop research, even animal research in this country is funded by the United States.
That's right.
Right? So it's funded by the United States. The United States stepping in to fund more is not just something that they're doing because they like Kenya. They're doing it because emerging diseases are now a worldwide problem. Nowadays, every time Ebola has been reported in Africa, Americans have had to be treated because of Ebola.
And it doesn't take too long before it gets there.
Yes.
I mean, the distance between where something breaks out to their shores is very short.
Yes.
Now, you did touch on this. I want you to tell me what you interpret from, first of all, just the choice in the stopovers.
Yes.
Right at the beginning, the Carter Library, we saw the interactions with the King family, the civil rights movement.
Yes.
We saw the visit to the Tyler Perry studios and all the other things, the Coca-Cola conversation, the health deals, all of those. What do you think is happening here?
Well, if you look at...
How should we interpret this?
If you look at what the president has been talking about in terms of his diaspora plan and his digital business plan, digital entrepreneurship plan, you quickly discover that all of his stops have been one targeted at that. He's talked about technology. He's talked about STEM, investment into STEM. He's talked about Silicon Savannah partnership. He's talked about the CHIPS program in the United States that he wants to be part of. So all of these things are congruent with his digital business plan for the country.
Right.
So that's congruent. Two, his visit to Tyler Perry Studios is a callback to when he talked about Talanta.
Talanta Hela and
Exactly.
Talanta,
Yes.
all the Talanta programs.
Yeah. So you may not agree with the programs, that's up to you. But in terms of him following up on what he exactly is doing, it's exactly the same thing. In fact, if you look at his trip last year to the United States, which he did, you remember that those are the same things that he was pushing. Now, this is very important because one of the things that President Ruto needed to show us is he needed to show us that these things that he's talking about, online jobs, partnering with all of these things, how serious is he about it? He needed to show the Kenyan people, and he has done so. As to his visit to Martin Luther King memorials...
Sorry, just
yes.
to take you back just
Yes.
a little bit. On that point, put yourself in the shoes of a young creative, a young content creator
Yes.
from Kenya.
Yes.
Guys who grew up, or guys who were watching the rise of Eddie Butita and
Yes.
the likes.
Yes.
Guys whom they saw on the
Kate
stages.
Actress, yes.
No, all those guys from Churchill Live to all those guys. And these guys are ruling the digital space right now.
Yes.
Talk to us how impactful it is to see their role models, their guys, the Kawaida guys that they relate with on such a platform.
You know what is very critical with the democratization of technology? And I tell people this all the time. The distance between a Hollywood studio and your phone is getting shorter and shorter. Okay, so this is critical.
Guys, are you listening to that?
Yeah, the distance, the technology between Hollywood itself and your phone is shrinking. Your phone can shoot on 4K if you have 150K.
Right.
What is most important is two things. One is distribution. In the sense that when Butita, Kate Actress, Crazy Kena, whoever, does their production, other than the platform that is YouTube, how do they get distributed so well that their content is on demand in the United States, for example? So such partnerships, and what they do is they do not only give hope to the person who's listening to us at home and wants to follow the path of Crazy Kena and others, but it also gives hope to Butita, Kita, Crazy Kena, whoever you want to reference, when they go to such studios and they see what state of the art is, and then they can be able to judge what is the distance between them and success. Then you're also not only inspiring them, but also giving them a business plan which they can use. But what is most critical, and this is what I hope happens, is that Tyler Perry Studios should partner with Kenyan content creators to host those content creators on their platforms. Right? We want to see a Butita movie.
That's tremendous.
In Hollywood, right? We want to see, and we have, of course, many Kenyan productions on Netflix, but they are made for Kenya. We want to see them break out.
Crossover.
Exactly.
Crossover hit.
Yes. And that is one of the things when we were working in export promotion that was very important, is to make sure that Kenya is not only big in Kenya, but it's big elsewhere. And we've seen it's possible. Nigerians sing in their language, sing to their beats, produce their stuff in Nigeria, and now they are able to hold concerts at Madison Square Gardens and
fill it up.
Yeah. So there is a challenge there. But for the most important thing that Kenyans need to take away out of this is, one, AGOA is coming to an end, 2025. We are not sure what's going to happen. It's an election year. We've not finished the negotiations. Kenya did a brilliant negotiation with the UK immediately after Brexit. And that's why our tea, our coffee, our sweet potatoes going to the UK, yes, did not flounder as much. So similarly, on this side of the American side, we need to make sure that our EPZs continue delivering to the gap. We need to make sure that the jobs we have in the EPZs are still there for Kenyans. And that's the most important thing that Kenya can take out of this.
Now, Mark, there's something here that I'm sure people are wondering.
Yeah.
What does the US benefit in all this?
That's actually a brilliant question.
And as you think about that, something else just popped up just as we were preparing for this interview. Our very own Larry Madowo,
yes,
whom we love and sometimes hate in equal measure. Larry says and claims that a lot of the US broadcasters were actually cutting away when President Ruto started to speak.
Okay.
And only came back when President Biden speaks. Now, this is a historic event like this. Talk to us about that dynamic. What does the U.S. benefit from this, and how does the U.S. market receive this pomp and color for such an African president?
So let's be very clear. The United States does not do things because it likes people. Okay, the West is not like us. You know, I'll invite you to my house, and there's no business we're discussing. We just want to, have some tea, right? By the time the United States gives you a state visit, trust you me, they have interests. So let's count the interests.
Okay.
Interest number one is to make sure they establish influence in Africa away from China. Okay, there is a diplomatic Cold War between the United States and China. The US is keen to start developing in Africa again. It is keen to compete with Chinese businesses in Africa again. It is keen to access African markets. So number one, it is the fact that Kenya, through President Ruto, much less Uhuru, has now looked west. And clearly his diplomatic efforts are heading somewhere in the United States, because he's a president who's been in power for hardly 2 years. And he's been able to be given that. So he's definitely giving the United States a window into Africa. That's number one.
All right.
Number two is the United States security interests in Africa. If you were to think about it, the only truly democratic countries, truly democratic, in Eastern Africa are Tanzania and Kenya. Everything else has its own issues. So what Kenya is for the United States is that it is an opportunity for democracy and peace. Tanzania is a bit closed off, right, as a country. But Kenya is willing to send troops to Somalia, Yugoslavia, Sierra Leone, to Congo,
to Bosnia earlier in the 90s.
you know. So Kenya is a security asset, and that is why it's been given access to military training, equipment, and to be fast-tracked when they need to buy state-of-the-art equipment and to be given military aid. So that already is a big deal. Then you've got to ask yourself the question. Africa is the largest untapped market in the world. It has about 2 billion people who are hungry for technology, hungry for food,
appetite,
hungry for education, hungry for healthcare.
Even the culture.
Yes. So Africa, if you look at it, you've got to ask yourself, how do you access Africa? If you want to access Southern Africa, you do South Africa. You want to access Western Africa, you do Nigeria, right? You want to access Eastern Africa, where do you go? Kenya. So there is an interest in the Kenya's space, both as a leader in the East African community, but also, remember, Africa is implementing the Africa Free Trade Agreement. This is very important. So if you're looking at Africa and you're sitting in the States or in Europe, you're thinking, how do I begin to tap into the visions, dreams, and aspirations for Africans that Africans are planning for themselves? Now, this must come with a caveat. It must be Africa first. As far as Africans are concerned, we should go there with the Kenya first mentality. Because as they give us dinner, believe you me, it is also America first.
And I like that. I like that. Here's a question. Now there's a whole raft of questions here. First of all, I want you to talk to us about that pronouncement about the non-NATO ally.
Yes.
You know, first of all, you have touched on it in terms of what benefits exist for the United States and what benefits exist for Kenya.
Yeah.
But listen, the world is watching. African countries are watching.
Yes.
First question, should Kenya be proud to be the choice of the United States in this? That's one. And a close second to that is this. How should we expect our neighbors and the other countries, the local geopolitics, the regional geopolitics of Africa, what sort of reaction should we expect from those countries in Africa based on that?
First, let's start here. In terms of military cooperation throughout the history of Africa, of Kenya, we know that we have had Batuki Nanyuki since forever.
Forever.
That is the UK. In the last 30 years, America has not been involved in any military operation the UK is not interested in, including right now with the Houthis, right up here in the Strait of Hormuz. So, first and foremost, this is not new. Okay? We have had military cooperation between the United States and Kenya for over 60 years, right? Kenya has never militarily looked east or to Russia. It's never happened. Economically, we have looked east. But militarily, we have never looked outside of the United States and its allies. That's number one. So historically, we have that basis. But number two, strategically, you've got to ask yourself, the amount of resources that Russia promised last year in its Africa Heads of State Summit for the whole of Africa pales in comparison to what Kenya has gotten from the states in one visit. Okay? So in terms of military support also, in the war that is going on in Ukraine, and you are asked, whose equipment do you want to have access to? Whose intelligence do you want to have access to? Whose partnership do you want? And then you are told between Russia and the States, who are you choosing? Well,
the answer is quite clear.
It's quite clear. So the truth is, and this is the thing, and for many people, and I only have this privilege because I worked for 4 years in export promotion, the diplomacy of the world is military, it is trade, then everything else follows, right? That's where cooperation starts. Trade is important. Military alliance, military support, access to technology, access to training, and all of those things are very critical. And typically, when you want military support, you go to the best.
Plain and simple.
Yeah, that's...
And you get what you pay for.
Yeah.
So, talk to me. Okay, so this is happening. I mean, the eyes of the world are watching. The eyes of Africans are watching. What should we expect in terms of how, when the president now wraps up that visit, comes back home, what sort of reactions should we expect from our neighbors immediately in East Africa and the rest of Africa? That's one. But also, too, remember, in the early part of President Ruto's leadership, he was molding himself to be this Pan-Africanist. And there was a lot of support from African countries. They were saying, this guy from Kenya looks to be the man, looks to be the natural successor to the Kwame Nkrumahs of this day. That has somewhat changed. What are we expecting in terms of reaction in that degree, in terms of the perception of not just Kenya, but its leader, but also what sort of posture should we expect in terms of trade, in terms of, more like politics from our neighbors?
You know what is very interesting is we must look at our neighbors through a lens. So Congo, Sunday, had a failed coup involving American citizens. They've said some few savory words towards the Americans. You've got Rwanda, which has a very pro-Rwanda way of approaching these things, right? And then
Rwanda first.
Yes. You've got Uganda, which this LGBTQ war and them telling the IMF to take a walk is different for them. Now, for those countries, the relationship between Kenya and the States will not change the relationship between Kenya and them. But politically, it will be a talking point, right? It will be a talking point because, as you have said, Africa should not look to the West or the East as its savior. Africa needs to look towards Africa. And it's something even President Ruto has said, that Africa has to be for Africa. But that does not mean that we do not make allies. In fact, what I expect is many of the countries in Africa will now gravitate to Kenya to work closely because Kenya now has a direct access to a superpower.
That's right.
Right? If you look at Russia, for example, or China, and you tell me one country that has the status Kenya now has with the States, there's none. There's none.
There isn't.
So Kenya becomes a de facto big boy gatekeeper to the United States. Right? So in terms of the little politics here and there, yes. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, Kenya will become a port of call for help, right? Because they will figure if we are Sudan and we need help and we talk to Kenya, then Uncle Sam is just around the corner. So this particular partnership, especially this non-NATO partnership, is so critical in terms of peace in the region, but it will also make Kenya of demand. Right? Because if you want to deal with things and you're in our region and you know Kenya has a partnership with Uncle Sam, it's like if I know your pal is a billionaire, you'll become a bit closer.
I'll just suddenly be invited to many Arambes.
Yes.
But now, Mark, listen, with this, obviously, there comes a different kind of attention that may not be so good. Simply put, have we just painted an even bigger target on our backs, you know, from towards the enemies of the United States? Remember what happened in 1998? It was after a closer relationship that Kenya was having with the United States. We had Fazul Mohammed and Al-Qaeda looking at Kenya and Tanzania as targets. Have we just painted a target on our backs, Mark?
The question is did that target ever leave? Because we've had problems with Al-Shabaab and ISIS consistently. We as citizens may not feel it because our security forces do a very good job in Somalia, at our border, in terms of gathering information, in terms of keeping the attackers at bay. But for all intents and purposes, Kenya is still at war with Al-Shabaab. So the target never really left. And it did not leave, not just because of now our collaboration with the United States, but also it became bigger when President Mwai Kibaki and later Uhuru Kenyatta and now William Ruto has had a continued presence in Somalia, right? Which by the way, a lot of terror organizations consider it being an ally of the United States. Because remember, any person, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and the friend of my enemy is my enemy. So at the end of the day, Kenya has that target. Why not have that target and get better intelligence, get better partnership, get better equipment, get better training? Why would you not do that? Illogically speaking, it is the next best thing to do, right? And if you look at the horizon, if you take your crystal ball, the biggest danger that the world faces is not a non-powerful United States. It is a United States that stops partnering. Okay?
Tell me why you say that.
Trump, and why people fear him, is because he wants to pull back from things like NATO. Like he pulled out from the Paris Agreement, pulled out from the Iranian Agreement. So American isolationism, them closing you out,
you think that's a world threat?
That's a bigger danger than them continuing being who they are. And if you listen to any analyst, and I do a lot of this work, if you listen to any security analyst, they will tell you the biggest international threat, even to the war in Ukraine, is not that the United States does not have the military capacity to overcome Russia. It is that if Trump comes and he decides not to support Ukraine, then France and Britain will not be able to carry that weight. So if America is withdrawing, do you want it to withdraw with you or without?
Very good question. And on that note, Mark, on the home stretch of this interview, let's bring it home. Listen, you're the president. You're coming back from the US on a high.
Yes.
What sort of political scenario are you coming to back at home? How do you think the Kenya Kwanza government is going to sell or communicate all the goodies that they've come with from the US? And tell me, how significant is this going to be on how Kenya Kwanza, the posture of Kenya Kwanza, heading into what's remaining of the second half of their administration, the first term?
First thing, we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Our young people, joblessness, and the resources they need. As soon as possible, those scholarships that are being offered, job opportunities that are being offered, investments in terms of Coca-Cola investing into Kenya, and all of those things need to start happening. The patience window for Kenyans is small. So you'll say these good things, celebrate them. But if in 2 months they are not seeing some movement, then they begin to forget, and then you will have a hard time convincing them again. So it's very important that when he lands with his team, he puts the ball on the ground and hits the ground running as quickly as possible. That is going to be very critical. The other thing that is going to be very important is how he's going to handle the Haiti issue. It is going to be in the news constantly. It is going to be monitored carefully, and every single thing that goes wrong will go back to, you went to have dinner. And so it needs to be managed quite carefully. And I'm speaking now like a strategist, because that is a communication risk for them. Haiti is a big, big communication risk. The other thing that is going to be very important is that target that you talked about, that now Kenyans should feel more secure, right? That's going to be very, very critical. That Kenyans need to feel more secure in their streets, need to feel more secure in their border towns, and they have to feel like this particular aid that they've gotten is actually going to work. What is going to happen also politically is his detractors will have to ignore this trip. They will have to ignore it because there is very little to take away from it. And scoring 1 billion, and not necessarily in loans, investments and things like that, is a big thing.
Hard to argue with.
It's 2 billion, my friend, times 130 is 260 billion. That is a Eurobond.
But now there's already questions about the cost of the trip, regardless of who financed it. There's also the kind of the juxtaposition of you're going over there to rub shoulders with the high and mighty. The JS teachers on strike. There's still a healthcare crisis. There's still problems in the Northwest. The economy is still in the tank. There's still people who are concerned about this Finance Act and so on and so on and so on. So how do you expect, what would you advise Kenya Kwanza to tackle? What posture?
The posture they need to come with is that, one, Kenyans have forgotten about the 210 billion jet. Because today he's scored $1 billion, right? So he can be forgiven. What Kenyans are going to expect is the same vigor, pomp, happiness, and achievement they've made in the United States. They need to come here and do the same thing. They need to start declaring victories against cattle raiders. They need to give aid to the people on strike. They need the flood victims. They need to humanely move people who have been caught up in the riparian land in the story that you just showed. So the Kenya Kwanza, when you come back, which camera should I look at? That one. Kenya Kwanza, when you come back. The spirit of victory you have, bring it for every Kenyan. We need to feel it whether we sell Mtumba, whether we live in Baringo, or we live in Githurai. That's what we need to feel. Absolutely. Now, Mark, just real quick in one sentence before I let you go. Mark, Ricky G, Mount Kenya politics. Talk to us about that. I'll give it to you in one sentence. Ricky G became deputy president not being kingpin of a tribe. If he's looking at 2027, he must ask himself, why will the president need him? And therefore, he goes back home
And on that note, one last chance. That's your camera straight there. Give a message to the country. Your parting shot.
Guys, let's have hope. Things may have been difficult. Let's have hope. Let's hold each other up. And most importantly, hold your politician, your governor, your MCA, your president to account. These promises they're making you, make sure they deliver. That's the only tribe we should belong to, delivery.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, that has been the great Mark Bichachi, analyst, strategist par excellence, a man of insight, so to speak. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for sharing your insight on Insight tonight. Good people, that has been what we had to offer for you this evening. Thank you for choosing us to inform you of what's happening across your world. Up next is a turbocharged, supercharged sporting experience that is VAR. Keep it right here. My name is Victor Muyakane. Good evening and God bless you. Thank you so much.
And I agree.
How could you
water.
Oh.